to the Bayview Podcast with hosts Andrew Clark and Chris Emery. This is designed to be a discussion on all things life and faith. We hope this serves as a weekly resource and encouragement to you.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Bayview Podcast. My name is Andrew, one of your hosts, joined as always by Chris. How are you?
I am doing very, very good, man. Yeah,
Sweet.
doing good.
Yeah.
So,
Weather's kind of nice, rocking and rolling.
yeah, we, I don't know. I mean, most of you I know listening from our area, so I know yesterday we celebrated did I hear 53 degrees at one point?
Crazy. Walked outside, I was like, I don't need a jacket. This is awesome.
Dude, it was so good. So much sunshine.
Yeah.
And, and there obviously there's something about that. The sunshine for us is a big deal. It's not just the cold in northern Michigan, but it's that. But, just that. But just, I don't know, it just seems like there's just a lot of really great things happening. And just, just
cool.
Good, man. Yeah. And you, you're still adjusting to life with a newborn and a family of 5.
Yeah, it's going well. It's fun. Little one she's sleeping for the most part and doing what she's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Baby-wise. So, and the older two it's kind of fun seeing them be older. I don't know why they didn't seem so old until all of a sudden the third baby's brought into the picture, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, you guys are like little kids. This is crazy. So,
hey, Liam, run to the store for me.
Yeah, a couple times. So, no, it's just good. It's fun, and transition's always, got its ups and downs, but either way, we seem to be doing well.
That's good. I love it. And you guys just came off a big winter retreat.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
About 2 weeks ago, took a group, combined with some other churches, which we've really come to enjoy with our retreats and camps of teaming up with other people, and it was just really good. I was really proud of our leaders, and I think just the chance to, the weekend retreats, we treat them a little different, like a summer camp, where like a weekend retreat is way more focus oriented. It's a little more downtime. It's kind of like a restful mindset, where like summer camp is go, massive events, crazy. Even like the chapels are different in terms of teaching and worship styles and all that. But it was just really good. It was cool to get away with the kids. And a year ago we went to a winter retreat and took one student with like 3 leaders, and this year it was 12 students with 8 leaders. And so just like seeing that growth even was really cool. And
that is super cool.
That was good.
No, I love seeing it. I love seeing the videos and pictures coming out of it, and just seeing the momentum and just really the life that's just being breathed into that through you, your leadership, and your leaders. I think it's super cool.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun. It's good times.
Yeah, man. We we wrapped up an 8-week series on relationships.
Yeah.
I think we've said this before, but man, time flies when you map it by a sermon series.
Yeah, it went fast. That was like a fast 2 months.
Yeah, like 8 weeks gone, which is good because it got us through the heat of winter, the bulk of the winter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not over probably quite yet, but
no, for sure.
Yeah, it was just a really good, and we've had a ton of feedback. At least I have. I'm assuming you have. I've had a lot of conversations with individuals like, wow, this has really challenged me to examine my relationships. It's challenged me to invest more in my relationships.
Yep.
I believe it's brought up some things that were maybe some long buried underlying issues and things that needed to be talked about. Yeah. And it's been very cool just watching people respond to what the Holy Spirit's doing through this conversation, because relationships, everything in our lives is about relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, we're interconnected to everyone, it feels like. And there's just, I think it was pretty obvious throughout the whole thing. We talked a lot about the need for people, but with people, not only does it come the good times, but comes bad times. And just, I don't know, I look at a lot of the series that that one, I think the one we're going into, I think we've done a good job at, I've used that term like tools in the tool belt or the toolbox, like things that I think have been good takeaways for people to be like, okay, I could, like you were saying, like I could work on that. Or I need to improve that. Or, okay, that was really helpful to learn so I can go and implement that into my life. And I thought this series was really good for that. Just a really a good one for chance. I think the marriage Sunday was awesome. And I do think even this past Sunday, you talking about conflict and just the little things that are just like, we all have dealt with it, gone through it, or are experiencing it. And I think to speak to those things was just, I don't know, it was beneficial. It was helpful. It was fun.
Yeah, there's definitely some really big things, I think. I'd say big moments maybe that stood out, statements that stood out through the different ones. Even back when Rachel Gentleman did the talk on being single. Yeah. And so many people that are single, that maybe struggle with being single. And just even her statement that being single doesn't mean you have to be alone. Yeah. And I think, man, that statement just resonated with me, not because I'm single, but because it's an encouragement that, hey, find community, find the relationships. Yeah. It may not be the romantic relationship you're looking for just yet. God will bring that in his timing, but you don't have to be alone. Yeah. Nobody said, in fact, we're not, and I think that's maybe the one of the foundational themes of this whole series that we kicked it off with, and that is that we're not even designed to be alone.
Yeah, 100%.
We're not meant to be alone.
Yeah.
From the very beginning, from Genesis, it's not good that man be, he's alone, so he's given a companion, a helper.
This is the first thing God says is not good.
Correct.
And I think that was, I think that was so clear throughout the whole thing. And like I said, even, that singleness message and my hope and prayer throughout the whole series was like when people who were single, but when we talked about marriage or parenting, they were hearing it being like, okay, I can start preparing for that now. Right. And I think that was so much, or vice versa, for the married couple to be like, oh man, we have a couple of these single friends or whatnot. How can we engage with them? Right. And that was my prayer, is that they would hear that and realize like, okay, A, I'm not alone. B, there's probably struggles that people are also dealing with that I'm dealing with. I just think just speaking to all those things was really helpful. And then, ultimately there's that reminder of like, we're kind of all in this together. Yeah. And for you, the individual, like, don't, easier said than done, obviously, but like, don't sit there just thinking, I'm gone, I'm alone. Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, and I mean, this is kind of one of the points even when we talked about Sunday in relation to conflict, but I think it stretches to any challenge in our relationships. Doing nothing isn't a solution. Yeah. Doing nothing isn't an option, really. And particularly what we talked about this last Sunday, because my thought is if you have relationships, you have conflict. Yeah. Yeah. It's inevitable. It's impossible to avoid. It's the natural result of people being in each other's lives. Yeah. Sometimes those conflicts are very quick and fleeting and move on quickly, but at other times they create deep wounds and hurt and division. And there are probably at some level, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, I would guess that every one of us at some level somewhere are carrying some version or form of an unresolved conflict.
Yeah, I would agree. And I bet you for a lot of people, it's just stuff they've just kind of forgotten about. Yeah. Right? It's the friend, or it is the one you were fighting with. You're just kind of like, that was years ago. I'll just whatever. Yeah. Just move on from it. But there is, I would think that some way, somehow, we probably all have some form of unresolved conflict. I would agree with that. Yeah. And it might just be the little stuff too. Yeah. But even that adds up.
What really rattled my cage with that whole idea was 2 weeks ago on the podcast, we were talking about loving your enemies. Yeah. And you and I began to talk about, here's the real litmus test. Here's the barometer on it. How do I feel when good things happen to my enemies, and how do I feel when bad things happen to my enemies? Sure. Yeah. And I was like, oh man, like, I think I'm happy when bad things happen, and I think I'm mad when good things happen, which means unresolved.
Still got conflict.
Yeah, unresolved.
Yeah, and hopefully you listen to that episode, our therapy session episode. That's really what that felt like. But
it's just you and I helping each other out.
But no, I think you're right. I think those two really do play well together, and it is a good test. Like, it's the idea of, I don't have an issue with that person, but then if I'm excited when something goes wrong with them, it's like, okay, there's something there still, and we would call that conflict. It might not be like I need to come to blows with this individual, or I need to yell at this individual, but there's a disdain for the individual. Which would be a conflictual thing.
Yeah. And it's really what we talked about a little bit, and why there's no way to get around from doing nothing about it, because of what it does to us and how much it affects us. And I think that's exactly why, we looked at what Jesus taught in Matthew 5:23, where he's like, the summary version is, hey, if you're coming to worship me, but you realize you've got something unresolved, go take care of that. coming to worship me is not bad, but unresolved conflict affects your ability to worship me.
Yeah.
Unresolved conflict affects your intimacy with me.
Yeah, 100%.
Because that's a place in our heart that is not being completely open to the Holy Spirit coming in.
Yeah, and I think you no matter how hard you try, there's part of you that's thinking about it or focused on it too.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, again, so you're not even giving your full self, like you just said, you're not even giving your full self to God, because there's this part of you that's just still, I wonder what that person's doing right now, right? Or I wonder, like, our mind is focused on something else.
So what would be your best educated guess? Neither you nor I are licensed professional counselors. We should have invited a couple of those back maybe.
Yeah.
Especially 2 weeks ago. They could have helped us.
Yeah.
But best guess, biggest reasons why people just avoid dealing with conflict. Just bury it and move on.
I think a lot of times it's the idea of opening yourself up to critique, or the fact that you might be wrong.
Okay.
So I think it really is the inability to set aside ego. You know, maybe that's just me speaking out my own issues, but like that,
Yeah.
I think that's a big issue for people, is like just straight up, what if they don't what if they're not willing to work on it? Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of that, but I think it really is the idea of like, I might have to admit I'm wrong. The issue might be me. Mm-hmm. And that's not a fun thought process. So
pride, basically. Yeah. My pride gets in, which, I'm right there with you.
Yep.
I'm sure that's a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we just don't want to revisit the pain.
I think that's fair. Yeah. Yeah. There's fear of that. Maybe.
Yeah.
That was the word that came to mind, was fear. Like there's just, it's just easier, using air quotes, easier to just kind of move on and not deal with it, because I've dealt with it in my own way. Mm-hmm. And, we know that's not true. You just kind of build, like, you just have like a raised scar then at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a big one, afraid of dealing with it.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I think a lot of times it comes, and maybe this is connected a little bit to pride. How many of us are kind of at the place where it's like, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't technically do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And you very well may not have.
Yeah.
But we kind of just hide behind that and be like, well, listen, when you're ready.
Yeah. If it's an issue, they'll come say something to me.
Correct.
Yep.
I don't know. I think there's so many things. We looked at James chapter 4 Sunday, and it kind of laid out three big categories. And maybe everything falls under it. It kind of talked about desires, motives, and pride.
Yep.
James like, hey, what causes all this problems, causing the quarrels and fights? Well, it's my desires that are in contrast to God's desires. It's my motives that are probably very self-serving or selfish or self-protecting.
Yep.
And then it's my pride.
Yeah.
It's about me.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And I think, I don't know, I think a lot of times which it's natural maybe, but I think quickly of marital relationships in this regards, because that's where most conflict happens, right?
Yeah, I think it's the person you're closest with and connected to the most, is probably spend the most time with. Yeah.
I didn't have everybody raise their hands. If I had the percentage of people that would have raised their hands, married people Sunday morning, when I said, how many of you got in an argument on your way to church? What percentage do you think had some sort of a disagreement or conflict on the way?
A low end 75%. Like, especially if it's just a simple, like, didn't hear each other trying to get the kids ready. Like, there's that reality of like, I think there's some sort of tension. Yeah.
There is, man. It's like this classic, there's something about getting ready for church on a Sunday. Everybody's rushing around. Yep. You got to get together. You got to look good. You got to get the kids dressed.
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite right now is early morning. There's like 3 sound machines going on in our house, and I'm in one room and Nicole's in the other, and she'll say something and I'll say what, and she'll say, I can't hear you, and I'll yell it, and then she'll say, don't yell at me, and I'm just like, what is happening? Like just and all of a sudden we're like in this mini little like back and forth argument that's just like, okay, you just want me to help put Liam's shirt on? Okay. Like, you know what I mean? It's like there's nothing conflictual, but yeah, so I would count that. Like, you know what I mean? That's
dude, all day long. It's funny. My wife and I recently had that same conversation of like, all right, I need to know, was that volume or volatile intentions? Like where are we at here?
Yeah. Don't yell at me. No, I was just yelling so you could hear. It's just like but
the spark is lit sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And then we're on. And I think those little ones, I mean, one thing my wife and I think have really learned to do over the last 5 or 6 years is the silly little things like that, the misunderstandings, misinterpretations, miscommunication, to not let it become bigger than it is.
Yep.
if there's something that happens like that, one thing we've been doing lately is like if one of us responds in a way that seems intense, the other will be like, well, that was a little intense.
Yeah.
And now you have a choice.
Yeah.
Now the receiver, because it's usually me. Usually I'm the intense in my tone.
Sure.
I have a choice. I can get defensive.
Yep. Prideful.
Prideful. I can defend my position of like, I wasn't being intense. Then now it's on, right? I wasn't being mad.
Yep.
Or I can be like, you know what? You're right. And laugh it off.
Yep.
And choose this other path.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that we kind of wrap things up with, and it applies to everything to do with conflict resolution, is it is a choice to be made.
Yeah.
You can choose to enter into this path of resolution, or you can choose not to.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to the core of the gospel itself, whereas God chose our relationship over the need for us to pay for our sins.
Yeah.
So he chose reconciliation over justice.
Yeah.
We looked at Joseph from Genesis 45 when his brothers are back in front of him, and he has every right, all the power in the world for retribution.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have dropped the hammer.
Yeah. It's been ugly. Yeah.
And he chose, in fact, I didn't have time to dig into this Sunday, but it wasn't just that he chose the relationship over his brothers. It was the fact that the relationship had never been good.
Mm-mm.
So it's not like he was restoring a past closeness.
Yeah. Let's go back to what we once were. Yeah.
It was never good. It was always laced with hatred and bitterness and envy. It led to them faking his death and selling him. But it went further than that. If you read back, it's not just the brothers. He says, I want to take care of you and your families and your kids. I mean, that is extreme.
Yeah. 100%.
It's an extreme choice to be made.
Yeah. And it's one that, like I think you kind of said it, choosing the relationship over being right, or choosing the relationship over, like, is it worth it to you?
Yeah.
If it's worth it to you, then you'll set a lot of things aside. First and foremost being your pride, second being sometimes the idea of being right. There's that willingness to be like, no, this person or this relationship is way more important than this conflict right here, right now.
Yeah.
And I'd rather go, and I struggle with this, but like, for those of us who don't like conflict, it's like, man, once you learn how quickly conflict can be resolved when you want to face it and go through the storm of it, compared to try to hide and hunker down and wait it out and realize, the storm won't leave until I actually move through it. Like it's like that. It's that reality of like facing it head on versus just letting it kind of dwell over you.
Well, it's the difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking.
Yeah.
And we broke that down a little bit. I think my history, if I go back far enough, especially in the early days of our marriage, I was a peacekeeper, meaning the same thing. Easier to avoid the conflict, don't want to rock the boat, don't want to cause more disagreement, so let's just let it go. And I began to really internalize a lot of my own feelings, maybe some of my hurts.
Yeah.
But that was really probably more accurately described as I began to internalize resentments and bitterness.
Yeah.
And it just kept building and building and building.
Yeah.
And
in some ways, those of you who don't like to deal with conflict, you probably find yourself on edge a lot more because now you're just waiting for the bad because you've never actually dealt with things to experience the good.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that's another thing that a trap you can fall into when you avoid conflict is just the natural assumption of, well, this is going to be an issue, so I'm always going to be on edge because I want to deal with it.
Yeah. And man, think about that. Think about where that goes then is if I'm living with a natural bent towards negative assumptions, how can my partner or my friend or family, how can they ever win?
Yeah.
Because now I'm living with that assumption you're going to do this or it's going to go south. And so now it's like everything's already stacked against you and you're baiting the relationship into negativity.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm sure I've been there. I know I've done that. Like whatever. It's going to, she's going to be in a bad mood anyway, so might as well just be in a bad mood first or, whatever unfair places I take it.
Yeah.
And we choose. And so I certainly don't want to downplay the fact that there are people out there who are genuine victims. No doubt about that. I'm not debating that. There are victims of abuse. There's victims of woundedness. There's people that have been victimized. They're victims, legit reasons. But there's a lot of us that we want to play the victim.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody wronged you. Maybe you contributed. But we're hurt. We're mad. We're angry. and we're going to be a victim, and I didn't choose this, and I can't help that I'm all right. So I'm probably going to get some serious pushback on this one, but I think that was one of the most negative things about that Enneagram that came out. I think people could take an Enneagram test, find a number, and that became their crutch.
No, that's a fair assessment.
Right?
We saw that. Like my wife, she studied it a bunch. Like she got really good at being able to kind of conversate through that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's like one of the number one issues though, is someone's like, well, I'm an 8, so this is how I am.
Yeah, so deal with it.
And it's just like, yeah, that's not how to use that correctly.
Correct.
But that's really easy. And again, it's like, you can do that with anything though. Like, well, I don't deal with conflict well, so be nice to me.
Yeah,
You're like,
exactly.
that's not being an adult. Like,
Yeah.
or just some of that. But I think we do that. Like, we try to find the quickest way to hide, protect, and avoid.
Sure.
So,
and I think that probably stretches into all the topics of relationships. Really, we can hide behind what we say we are. So I'm alone because I'm an introvert. Okay,
Yep.
well, again, that's a choice. You're not choosing to maybe be an introvert, but you're choosing to be alone.
Yeah.
And so I'm choosing this. But I think we love to shun the responsibility of our decisions,
Sure.
or the lack of decisions.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think when it comes to conflict, I think there's a choice to be made, and especially if you're listening, and maybe you are a married couple, and maybe you feel like your marriage is at a distance. Okay, what are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the path that leads to a healthy, awesome, godly marriage, or are you going to choose to do nothing? Because those are your two choices. You can choose to go sit down and have a conversation. You can choose to humble yourself and just surrender all this stuff to God. You can choose to reach out for help.
Yeah.
I loved how many emails and messages I received over this series of people asking for counseling referrals.
Yeah.
Because they were choosing to get help.
It's awesome.
Now, I don't know if our counselors that we refer to are happy or not, because we're probably flooding these guys with calls.
Sure.
They're probably like, okay, enough, stop.
Yeah.
But we are. But I was like, good. That's a choice you've made.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some probably sitting around that are just like, okay, I'm going to choose to do nothing. And that's not a choice.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not a good option. So when you start choosing, we talked about this a little bit Sunday, who's going to make the first move?
Yeah.
Right? Who's going to move first? We talked about an apology standoff.
Yep.
You ever been one of those?
Yep. Yeah.
Going no further.
A couple times. Yeah, it's just, it is. It's a natural, like, again, it's, am I wanting to win, or am I wanting to, like, figure this out and make sure we're good?
Yeah.
And when the stance is always taken of, I must win, this is a competition, it's a war, whatever you want to call it. It's like, I just think about pre-marriage counseling. We talk about the art of war, the art of conflict, and it's like, that's one of the things we talk about is like, the desire to be right can be just as conflictual as the actual conflict issue you're going with.
That's right.
It's like, are you willing to have the actual conversation, putting aside the pride? Again, that's another prideful stance of like, I must be right and I must win this.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you're just trying to protect yourself from actual like dealing with the issue.
Yeah.
But I think that when you talk about apology standoff, I think you have both people then in that situation be like, no, I must be right.
Yeah. And I think everything we do, so this is kind of how I really begin to think about it. Everything, all the steps we talked about, you got to take it back and filter it through James 4. So traditionally, with me and my wife, I am quick to apologize. I usually apologize first. She doesn't really like apologizing. She it's an acquired taste to her. Yeah. She'll come around to it eventually, but and she'll tell you, we laugh about it now. We've been married almost 30 years. But I have to be honest with myself too. If I go back and say, okay, I made the first move. Okay, well done. Okay, what was my desire, motive, or where was my pride in that?
Sure.
There are times where I'll make the first move and my motive is not reconciliation. My motive is spite. Or there's times where I will apologize first, but it's not out of a motive of asking and seeking forgiveness. The motive is to make the other person feel worse.
Sure.
So now we're getting tricky. Now it's not like, okay, I went first, now what? Okay, go first, pause. What's the motive? What's the desire? Where's your pride? Check your pride.
Yeah.
And then make that move. Same thing when we talk about, start with what's my fault, all right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I can list my faults, but I can sometimes do it in a way that has the attitude or the motive to hurt the other person.
Yeah, faults. I work too hard. I'm always on time. Yeah.
I'm too good to you.
Too good to you.
I do too much around the house. I provide too well.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. Like it gets tricky, and
Yeah.
it can get a little tangled and messy a little bit. But again, I think it's even kind of going back to a broader picture of Jesus. When he talks the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about the letter of the law versus the heart of the law. You can do the letter of the law. It doesn't mean you're doing the law. Yeah. And I think we can go through these steps of reconciliation and conflict resolution, but it may not mean we're doing it with the right heart, because our motives, desires, and pride may be out of whack.
Yeah.
And so I would almost encourage you right here, if you're thinking like, well, I went first. We got home from church Sunday, and guess what? I went first.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the motive in that?
Yeah.
Like, how'd that roll out for you?
Yeah. Again, it's like, were you trying to, I think your comments on peacemaking versus peacekeeping and some of that, like, are you just trying to deal with it, or to actually like really deal with it,
or prove a point,
and really just have it be actual solved, like conflict resolution.
Yeah. I think that there's so much that we have to continually just, and I think it comes back to just examining our hearts, right? We keep coming back, and we talked about asking God for wisdom, and then allowing the Holy Spirit to take place, and I think I just always love, and maybe it's for me, I have to go back and read them all the time and just reflect, but that the fruits of the Spirit given in Galatians 5 of humble, patience, kind, gentle, all those things. So many of those things are not my natural tendency.
Yeah.
And so I know what I can produce. In my abilities, I'm going to produce intensity, condescending attitude oftentimes. I'm a great debater, and so I can debate with the goal of maybe making the other person feel foolish.
Yep.
My logic meter works like this. If your logic and my logic are not the same, I'm right and you're stupid. Mm-hmm. You're not just wrong. You're silly.
You know what you're talking about. Yep.
And so those are all what Chris produces. Yeah. And so the best thing I can do is to pause before, whether it's a conversation with my wife or whether it's a difficult conversation I'm having with maybe a church member or a friend. All right, God, go before me into this conversation. Give me wisdom, give me patience, help me to listen first. Yeah. Let me be slow to speak. I don't want to speak fast. And those are all things I just can't produce that on my own. Yeah. And I think that's a big part, and maybe misses in a lot of our closest relationships. I'd probably be sad to know, or we would be sad to know, how few married couples genuinely pray together. Yeah,
I thought it was just going through my head of like things in certain seasons, and a lot of times it continues even after that time of I find myself praying for in my own personal prayers of just like, again, really being honest, like, God, would you make me patient? Or God, would you give me peace? Like some of those kind of things that we don't, like you said, and I agree, like we don't naturally just produce that on our own. And so I think, but yeah, then going forward as a couple, it's like, are you part of conflict resolution might be like, where's your spiritual intimacy with each other? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I know you and I, we both do a fair bit of premarital counseling. I think that's one of the things we talk about through the course that we take them through is different levels of intimacy. And that obviously there's physical intimacy, and that's reserved for the confines of marriage. But even taking into our broader relationships, family, friends, close relationships, there's emotional intimacy, there's spiritual intimacy. I read one recently that I thought was really interesting. This is more for married couples, but there was recreational intimacy. Yeah, that's cool. Which I thought, that's a really cool way to describe, like, are you having fun together? Yeah. Are you just doing stuff? Do you share hobbies? Do you do something more than just go home and plop down on the couch and eat dinner or something? I mean, what's the recreational side? Where's that? So I don't know. I think so much of that comes into play. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's like connected. Do you know each other? And that goes into even friendships and all that too. Like, do you know your friends, and do you know like the value of? Like, I keep going back to Sunday. I just loved the idea of like, are you actually focused on the relationship, or just being right, or is yourself more worth in the relationship? Yeah, yeah. I don't know why I miss this for so long. But I remember being at a wedding years and years ago. I think it was one of my nephews. And one of the coolest things was I heard the minister saying that the reason we do weddings at the front of the church at the altar is because marriages are based on sacrifice.
Mm.
And I thought that was in the moment, and I know not everybody gets married at a church anymore. In fact, that's the cool, trendy thing, so that's fine. But the whole concept behind it is like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
There's sacrifice. But again, that stretches beyond just the confines of marriage, because Jesus says, what better love has this than a friend lay down his life for a friend?
Mm.
So Jesus is saying, like, listen, relationships are driven by sacrifice, and we're told to love each other the way Christ loved us.
Yeah.
Well, now that's a whole different level,
Mm.
because Jesus himself came to serve, not be served.
Yeah.
He came to love those that were unloved. While we were sinners, Christ died for us. So while we were the enemy, he loved us the most. I mean, it just goes on and on of like, wow, that's if I've got to live up to that standard, I probably have some examining to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotta get some things right.
Yeah. Things right with my friends. Things right, maybe right with your parents.
Yeah, that's a good one. Or kids. I think there's another too. It's like I'm learning that as a dad, of like my ability to get down and apologize to them and be on their level and show them how that works, and the value of then seeing that play out between them or between others. Like it starts then,
Yeah. And the interesting thing is you'll find this, and several weeks ago you guys did an awesome podcast on parenting, and just love the guests that you had on. I was out of town that week. But then one thing that I've discovered that probably wasn't represented at that table was, as your kids become adults, what is that? How does that challenge and change that relationship as well?
Sure.
But there's even times now where I will have to apologize to my adult kids.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe I reacted poorly. Maybe I said something harsh, or my bad. I was tired. I shouldn't have had the attitude. Whatever it may be. And there's still that humbling. There's that work we have to do on all of these relationships.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because now that I have all my kids are adults, the friendship side of things are really cool, and that grows and develops. But it still takes a ton of work.
Yeah.
It still takes a lot of work to put in that relationship.
100%.
But it's valuable. I would not do it.
Yeah, and I think that's putting I feel like a lot of the conflict issue, and we know this, it's tied into our pride.
Yep.
And what is your capability? Really, it's probably something we all need to be praying for, is like that my pride would be less. That's the whole idea of like, he must become greater, I must become less mentality.
100%.
If we really want to be like Jesus, it is that idea of like, I'm going to put this stuff aside and love this person the way they're supposed to be loved, which means dealing with conflict the way it's supposed to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, less of me, more of him, right?
Yeah.
So if we go back to Galatians 5, so we know we read the more of him version, the Holy Spirit version. So it's the patience, it's the love, it's the kindness, it's the self-control, it's all of those things. But the other side of that is by my own power, then it results in things like impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like these. I mean, so it's like, okay, that's what we all can produce.
Yeah.
Some of us better than others.
Yeah.
So if we have any hope, our hope is found through Jesus Christ. We have this Holy Spirit encounter, and he begins to produce the things that we all desire. Yeah. Then we have the love, the joy, the peace, the patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Yeah. And so that's what he begins to produce in us. So my encouragement would be this, that one, if you miss Sunday, go to our website. You can re-listen to the message. You can find sermon notes right there as well. It kind of lists all the steps that we talked about, some things to begin to do if you choose the relationship over being right or over whatever. But I think I would encourage you to go back and just start at James 4. Mm-hmm. Go back and read that. Yeah. Because he just really lays it down of like, hey, check your heart first.
Yeah, it's a good starting point.
Before you say a word, before you do anything, because I did offer one bit of advice Sunday. Please don't come and tell me you forgive me before we have a conversation. Yeah. That's the classic move. check your heart, check your motive,
Yep.
check your desires, and check your pride.
Yeah, that's good.
And then make the choice. Choose the relationship. Choose forgiveness.
Yeah.
And we talked about it even. It doesn't mean the relationship may go back to where it was, but choose reconciliation and healing over doing nothing.
100%.
So
That's good.
cool.
It's a fun series.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time each week just to pop in and spend a few minutes with us. We value it. We know you have other options, so we appreciate you taking the time. Hit like or subscribe at the bottom of the screen or whatever platform you're listening on. We're on all the major platforms. That way you never miss an episode because we're here each and every week. Yeah. Got a new series to start next week. I'm excited about it.
Be a good time.
Yeah, it's going to be good. So don't miss it. Until then, it's Chris. It's Andrew. We're out of here. We'll see you next time around.